The world is full of secrets. Some are hidden in plain sight, and others are buried so deep they'll make you question everything you know.
Like a massive luxury liner at the bottom of the Atlantic.
Here we don't just tell the stories, we dig deep. We question everything, and we aren't afraid to pull the thread.
Even if it means suggesting that the most famous shipwreck in history might not have been what we've been told.
And let's be honest, we're going to have some fun while we unravel one of the most audacious insurance frauds ever conceived.
Or is it just another iceberg of conspiracy theories?
Welcome to the show. He's Chunder Joe.
And he's not.
This is Chunderstruck Media, and on today's episode, we're going to dive deep.
Titanic deep.
Ocean Gate, Titanic deep.
Into conspiracy so sinister, so slick, so diabolically evil.
If true, your brain's going to feel like it was squeezed tighter than a billionaire in a homemade Ocean Gate sub at depth when that pressure starts to get a little, how should I put it?
Spicy?
Yeah, spicy. Let's go. CJ, set the scene for us.
April 15th, 1912, and the unsinkable happens. The RMS Titanic tries to occupy the same time and space as a 1.5-ton block of ice and loses, plunging into the icy depths of the North Atlantic, taking over 1,500 souls, and with her, the world mourns the greatest maritime disaster in human history. Not even a Gordon Lightfoot song to boot.
But what if I told you that ship down in Davy Joe's locker is not the Titanic at all, but her older, uglier sister ship, the Olympic?
So the Titanic is secretly the Olympic? Sure, and the sea is secretly gluten-free.
Actually, I'm pretty sure it is. And what if I tell you this wasn't a tragic accident at all, but the most elaborate insurance fraud scheme ever conceived?
If that's true, then my compass is pointing to Fantasyland, because that's some serious north of nonsense.
Well then, adjust your bearings and lock your coordinates, because we're about to navigate through waters that'll spin that compass in circles. Picture this. It's the early 1900s. Britain is in an absolute arms race. Well, a ship's race with other European nations to build the biggest, most luxurious ocean liners.
This sounds like peak industrial ego, right? My boat's bigger than yours, that sort of thing.
Exactly. And the White Star Line is competing hard against their rival, the Cunard Line. Cunard has just launched the Lusitania and the Mauretania. And these fast and fabulous floating palaces had polite society buzzing.
So White Star Line needs to one-up them.
Oh, full steam ahead with that truth. And in 1902, the White Star Line gets purchased by the International Mercantile Marine Company, which is backed by none other than J.P. Morgan.
Ah, I know that guy. American financier and banker John Pierpont Morgan. No relation to Tracy.
Can confirm. So Morgan and White Star Chairman Joseph Bruce Ismay commissioned 3 Olympic-class ships. If they can't beat Cunard in speed, they'll beat them in size and luxury. These ships would be the biggest and most opulent vessels ever built.
Right. They want to prove to Cunard who really has the bigger ballroom.
And Cunards were already pretty big.
Those 3 ships got names?
They do. The Olympic, the Titanic, and the Britannic. The Olympic was built first and launched in October 1910. The Titanic's keel was laid in March 1909, but she wouldn't launch until May 1911.
As I understand it, the Olympic, the older sister, had a bit of a rough start to her career.
Yeah, that's putting it mildly. On September 20th, 1911, the Olympic is leaving Southampton.
That's in England, for anyone not familiar.
Right? So she's leaving port when she collides with a British warship called the HMS Hawke.
A warship? That's not a matchup a Lux liner is going to win.
No, it's not. The Hawk basically rams into the Olympic starboard side, that's the right side for us landlubbers, tearing a massive hole near the rear of the ship.
So the Hawk rips the Olympic a new one.
Okay, yes, in a sense. And she lives back to Belfast where they assess the damage and try to buff it out.
So this is really where the conspiracy theory takes off.
Yeah, because the claim is that the damage to the Olympic is way worse than the public was told. According to conspiracy theorists, particularly a guy named Robin Gardner, who wrote a book about this in 1998, the Olympic was so severely damaged that she was basically a financial disaster.
Right. Gardner claims the keel is broken, the hull is twisted, the turbine engine was damaged. Basically, she was a nautical hot mess with first-class cabins.
Sounds like Twisted Sister. We're not going to make it.
So why is this important?
The Royal Navy was found liable for the collision, but, and this is a big but,
You know my stance on big butts.
the court case dragged on and the insurance company wouldn't pay out while the lawsuit was pending.
So White Star Line is sitting there with his damaged ship, no insurance money coming in, and meanwhile, the Olympic isn't earning them anything because he's just sitting there in the dock.
Conveniently, right next to the Olympic in the Belfast shipyard is her nearly identical sister ship, the Titanic, still under construction and almost ready to sail.
I think I see where this ship is headed.
The conspiracy theory says that the White Star Line made a decision. Switch the two ships, paint the damaged Olympic to look like the Titanic, send her out on her maiden voyage, arrange a little accidents, collect the insurance money for a brand new ship, and boo, money problem solved.
That is absolutely diabolical. Let's talk about the so-called evidence. What did the conspiracy theorists point to that makes them think this switch actually happened?
All right, well, buckle up. There's actually quite a bit that seems suspicious on the surface. Let's start with the most famous piece of evidence, the portholes.
The windows on the ship?
Yeah, one and the same. So the conspiracy theorists point out that the photographs that allegedly show the Olympic with 16 portholes on one side and like Titanic with 14. But then in photos taken before the Titanic's maiden voyage, suddenly the Titanic has 16 portholes.
So they're saying they swapped the ships but forgot to change the portholes?
Or couldn't because it would be too much work.
But haven't researchers looked into this and confirmed the Titanic's design was changed during construction? They did add portholes, and that's not suspicious. That's just normal ship construction. So that argument's kinda weak. What about the fact that two ships had different hull numbers stamped into various parts of the ship?
They weren't all that different. The Olympic was yard number 400 and the Titanic was 401, and these numbers could have easily been swapped or hidden.
Okay, but here's the problem with that. When the Olympic was scrapped in 1935, yes, she sailed until 1935. Workers salvaged a ton of her fittings, wooden panels, fixtures, all that kind of stuff. And guess what was stamped on the back of those panels?
Rose's deathbed confession that Leo could have fit on the door?
I still don't think he could. Hull number 400, the Olympics number. And when researchers have examined the items recovered from the wreck at the bottom of the Atlantic, they all have the same number, 401, the Titanic's number. So that actually seems like pretty solid evidence against the conspiracy.
They were building two almost identical ships side by side. It's not impossible parts could have been shared or delivered to the wrong ship.
That seems like a stretch. What about the physical differences between the ships?
Okay, well, they were sister ships, but they weren't identical twins. I'll give you that.
Okay, I'm listening.
Okay, so the Titanic was slightly longer. She had a different promenade deck configuration. Parts of it were closed while the Olympics was open. The spacing of the windows on A and B decks was different. There were different ventilator placements, different porthole arrangements in specific areas, different shell plating around the anchor areas.
So basically, if you knew what to look for, you could tell them apart.
Maybe. The ships were built in an open-air shipyard in Belfast.
And thousands of workers from Harlan and Wolff were crawling all over both ships. Civilian visitors toured the yard regularly. The shipyard photographer, Robert Welch, took hundreds of photos of both ships during construction. So for a switch to happen, thousands of people would have had steady mum.
Okay, well, I mean, if you're a regular working both ships, maybe you don't catch on. It's a big project with millions of parts and a steady paycheck, and you got mouths to feed.
I'm skeptical, but okay. What about the JP Morgan angle?
That's where this really gets interesting. JP Morgan owned the company that owned the White Star Line. He had booked a personal suite on the Titanic for its maiden voyage, a luxurious room with his own private promenade deck, a bath, even with cigar holders built into it.
Schmancy.
But at the last minute, cancels his trip. He stays in France to enjoy treatments at a luxury spa.
So you're suggesting JP schedules Manny Petty as an airtight alibi?
Tight as a tiger.
But isn't he like in his 70s at the time? In the early 1900s? That makes him like the crypt keeper. Old farts frequently change travel plans of health reasons.
Look, all I'm saying is he arranged for plausible deniability.
Okay, so I've heard the evidence, and it just doesn't add up.
Do tell.
So problem number one, the insurance math doesn't work.
Well, the Titanic cost $7.5 million to build. That's in 1912 dollars, which would be something like 200 million today.
But she was only insured for 5 million. So they'd be losing 2.5 million even if the insurance paid out.
Okay, well, maybe someone overlooked the decimal place. They didn't exactly have state-of-the-art accounting systems at that time.
I mean, JP Morgan was one of the most successful financiers in history. I'm sure he knew what he was doing. Plus, the Olympic was insured for even more than the Titanic. So if they sank the Olympic but pretended it was the Titanic, they'd get even less money.
Sure, I guess, but they could have had a plan. We don't know. The scheme was probably complicated, especially if you're talking about switching two massive ships. And just because we don't understand it on the surface doesn't mean it didn't make sense to the owners.
Yeah, that's another issue I have. Switching the Olympic and the Titanic is not like secretly swapping the license plates on a couple of Ford Focuses on your neighbor's driveway. The Olympic was 882 feet long, almost 3 football fields. To swap these ships, you would need to
Switch the nameplates?
and change all the hull markings, switch the names on thousands of pieces of equipment, silverware, linens, change all the documentation, the crew assignments, somehow alter structural differences, the deck configurations, the porthole placements, all of that. And you have to do all this in a shipyard with thousands of workers and visitors walking through every day.
So you're saying there's a chance.
Sure, Lloyd. Well, I guess it's maybe impossible, but highly improbable.
But given enough time and money,
Okay, so they had money. How much time are we talking?
well, the Olympic came back for repairs in March 1912, just a few weeks before the Titanic was set to sail. So maybe a couple months?
And during all this time, no photos of this massive undertaking, no records, no reports.
Nothing public.
It would have been way easier to just commit insurance fraud the normal way.
There's a normal way to commit insurance fraud?
I mean, there are simpler ways. If White Star Line wanted to commit insurance fraud, they could have just set fire to the Olympic while she was docked. Stage an accident at the shipyard. Something that doesn't involve sailing a massive ship full of people into the middle of the Atlantic, somehow convincing it to hit an iceberg at exactly the right angle.
But sinking it down to the bottom of the Atlantic makes it hard to examine the evidence.
But what if the iceberg thing didn't work? What if it hit the iceberg and just bounced off?
Okay, they could have probably just pulled the garber plug.
The carb plug. Just pull the plug on the bath stopper and then let the water drain in?
Low tech, but effective.
Or what if it worked too well and the ship sank before they could get everyone off? Which, if you didn't know, that's actually what happened. If this was a deliberate sinking, they'd murder over 1,500 people for insurance money that they wouldn't even fully recoup. That's not just fraud, that's mass murder.
And less witnesses to pay off. Dead men tell no tales.
And you're expecting everyone involved, the White Star Line executives, the IMM board, JP Morgan, the ship's captain, and even the officers to all be okay with this?
I'm not saying these were humanity's finest.
And another problem, this might be the biggest one. The Olympic sailed successfully until 1935. If she was so badly damaged by the Hawk collision, how did it serve for another 24 years?
Yeah, you're right. The Olympic served a further 24 years and even served in World War I as a troop transport. They called her Old Reliable, but the answer is obvious and makes total sense with a conspiracy because she wasn't the damaged Olympic at all. She was the newly built Titanic, which you would expect to have a long and successful career.
All right, I'll concede on that point. But let's discuss the wreck itself.
The ship at the bottom of the ocean.
Right. Robert Ballard discovered the wreck in 1985, and since then, it's been extensively photographed and surveyed. Items recovered from the wreck all bear the number 401, the Titanic's hull number, not the Olympics. You're going to plant fake evidence 2.5 miles underwater in 1985, before most of this conspiracy theory ever even existed.
All right. So if you're saying the evidence doesn't support the conspiracy theory, and there are these logical problems with it, why do people believe it?
I think that's a question we tend to ask a lot on this channel.
True, but what about the Titanic specifically?
First, it's a genuinely fascinating story. The sinking of the Titanic is already one of the most famous disasters in history. Adding a conspiracy element makes it that much more intriguing.
Right, it taps into the idea that nothing is as it seems, that there are hidden truths behind major historical events. People eat that stuff up.
Plus, there's a kernel of truth at the core of it. The Olympic did get damaged. She was in Belfast getting repaired right when the Titanic was finishing construction. JP Morgan did cancel his trip at the last minute. These are all real facts.
And the conspiracy theory weaves those facts together into a compelling narrative, even if that narrative may not hold up under close scrutiny.
There's also the corporate greed angle. I think people are primed to believe that wealthy corporations and powerful businessmen would do terrible things for money.
Which, to be fair, wealthy corporations and powerful businessmen have done terrible things for money throughout history.
So it's not an unreasonable instinct. It's just that in this specific case, the evidence doesn't really support it.
And there's this desire to make sense of the tragedy. The Titanic sinking was this random, senseless disaster. Over 1,500 people died because of bad luck, hubris, and insufficient lifeboats.
But if it was a conspiracy, if it was planned, then at least there's a reason for it. There's someone to blame beyond just things went wrong.
Exactly. Conspiracies are, in a weird way, more comforting than chaos, because chaos means bad things could happen to anyone at any time for no reason.
Whoa, that's dark.
Yeah, the Titanic sinking is dark.
True.
So if you're saying the conspiracy theory isn't true, what actually happened?
Well, the boring answer, the Titanic hit an iceberg and sank.
Yes, but let's get into the details, because the real story is actually pretty interesting without the conspiracy stuff.
So it's April 14th, 1912. The Titanic is on her maiden voyage from Southampton to New York. She's carrying about 2,224 passengers and crew.
The ship is traveling at a pretty high speed, about 22 knots, through an area where ice warnings have been reported.
Why the lead foot?
A few reasons. White Star Line wanted to make a good impression on the maiden voyage. The captain, Edward Smith, was an experienced sailor who dealt with ice before, and there was this culture of bravado around these big ships, where they were so massive and well built, people thought they could handle anything.
Pride before the fall.
So at 11:40 p.m., the lookouts spot an iceberg dead ahead. They ring the warning bell, call the bridge, and the officers try to steer around it.
But they can't.
They almost do. If they had another 30 seconds, they might have cleared it. But the starboard side of the ship scrapes along the iceberg, opening up the hull plates below the waterline.
That was all it took.
That's all it takes. The ship has 16 watertight compartments, and she could stay afloat with up to 4 of those compartments flooded. But the iceberg damage floods 6 compartments.
So she's doomed.
More doomed than Dewey Finn on parent-teacher night. The ship is designed so that if the front fills with water, the weight pulls the bow down, which causes water to spill over into the next compartment, and the next compartment, and the next. It's inevitable at that point.
How long did they have?
The ship sank in 2 hours and 40 minutes, which sounds like a lot, but it's not enough time to evacuate everyone, especially because, and this is the really tragic part, there weren't enough lifeboats.
Sounds like something you'd probably want to get right.
This is actually one of the most frustrating parts of the whole story. The Titanic had lifeboat capacity for about 1,178 people, but there were over 2,200 people aboard.
2,224.
Yes. Why? Because maritime safety regulations at the time were based on ships' tonnage, not its passenger capacity. The Titanic actually exceeded the legal requirements for lifeboats at the time.
So legally, they were fine, but ethically,
it was a disaster. And here's the kicker. The Titanic was designed to hold more lifeboats. There were these things called davits. Those are the crane things that lower lifeboats for up to 64 boats. But the White Star Line decided that too many lifeboats cluttered the deck and spoiled the view of the first-class passengers.
you're kidding.
I kid you not. They chose aesthetics over safety.
Because nothing ruins a sunset like survival.
Well, it gets worse. Many of the lifeboats that were launched weren't even filled to capacity. Some left the ship half empty because there was confusion, panic, and this lingering belief that the ship really couldn't sink.
So even the lifeboats they had weren't used effectively.
Right. And in the end, only about 710 people survived and 1,500 died. The Olympic, despite her earlier damage, was repaired and went on to have a successful career. She served in World War I, where she transported troops and even managed to sink a German U-boat.
Really?
Yeah, she rammed it, earned the nickname Old Reliable for her service. She continued passenger service after the war and wasn't retired until 1935 when she was scrapped.
So the ship that the conspiracy theorists claim was a broken down wreck,
Was actually one of the most successful ocean liners ever built.
did she go on to top the box office though? And the unsinkable Titanic went down on their first voyage.
Irony's a cruel mistress.
So what do we take away from all this?
I think there are a few lessons here. First, obviously about the conspiracy theory itself. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
And the Titanic Switch Theory doesn't have that evidence. It has coincidences, speculation, ooh, we love some speculation, and a compelling narrative. But when you actually look at the facts, the financial records, the physical evidence, and the testimony of thousands of people, it falls apart.
But it is a good reminder to question things, right?
Absolutely. Healthy skepticism is important. We should question official narratives, especially when powerful corporations or governments are involved. History is full of real conspiracies and cover ups,
Like Watergate, MK Ultra, the Epstein file.
just to name a few. Real conspiracies do happen, but the difference is that real conspiracies leave evidence. Witnesses come forward, documents leak, patterns emerge.
And with the Titanic Switch Theory, you're saying the evidence supports the official story, not the conspiracy.
Which doesn't make for as exciting story, but it's closer to the truth.
What about the legacy of the Titanic disaster itself? What changed because of it?
You're asking how to put a positive spin on a disaster that killed hundreds of people.
Well, I am a glass half full kind of guy.
The sinking led to major reforms in maritime safety. Ships were required to carry enough lifeboats for everyone on board. Radio communications became mandatory. The International Ice Patrol was established to monitor icebergs in the North Atlantic shipping lanes.
So at least something good came from this tragedy.
Yeah, the Titanic disaster fundamentally changed how we think about maritime safety. It shattered this myth of the unsinkable ship and forced the industry to confront the reality that no matter how big or advanced the vessel is,
Nature doesn't care.
exactly. And I think that's maybe the most important lesson here. Whether we're talking about the Titanic's designers who thought they built an unsinkable ship, or conspiracy theorists who think they've uncovered a massive cover up, overconfidence can lead you astray.
Yeah, we should be confident enough to question things, but humble enough to change our minds when the evidence doesn't support the theories.
Couldn't have said it any better myself.
So to sum up, did the White Star Line swap the Titanic with the damaged Olympic as part of an elaborate insurance fraud?
Almost certainly not. The financial motive doesn't hold up, the logistics would have been nearly impossible, and the physical evidence from the wreck itself confirms that it was the Titanic down there and not the Olympic.
Is it a fascinating conspiracy theory that reveals interesting truths about corporate greed, maritime history, and human nature?
Absolutely. Even though the theory is probably not true, exploring it teaches us a lot about how conspiracy theories work, why people believe them, and how to think critically about extraordinary claims.
Plus, the real story of the Titanic, the hubris, the tragedy, the aftermath is compelling enough without the conspiracy.
Sometimes the truth is more interesting than fiction.
Sometimes, but not always.
Fair enough.
As always, we want to hear from you. Do you think there's anything to the Titanic Switch Theory? Are there episodes we didn't cover that you think are important? Let us know in the comment.
And if you've enjoyed this episode, check out our follow-up, where we break down how the swap could have been successfully carried out. And as always, hit that like button, subscribe to Chunderstruck Media, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss out on our next deep dive into the weird, the mysterious, and unexplained.
Until next time, stay curious, stay skeptical, and remember, not everything that sings is what it seems.